800 meters. Why did American generals demand this specific range? The doctrine dictated precise, single shots at extreme distances. Automatic fire remained a tool for emergencies only. In 1944, the U.S. Ordnance Department initiated a new rifle program. They ignored the statistics of modern combat. Instead, they codified a technical requirement for effective aimed fire at 800 meters. At this distance, a human silhouette is narrower than the front sight post of an M1 Garand. Aiming becomes guesswork. The military sought a hybrid. They wanted the weight of a carbine and the selective fire capability of a submachine gun. But they refused to sacrifice the power of the heavy .30-06 cartridge. The result was the T-20 rifle. It was not a new design. Engineers simply modified the Garand receiver to accept 20-round magazines from the Browning automatic rifle. The T-20 passed initial tests, but the foundation was flawed. It remained a heavy, long-action weapon, designed for a type of marksmanship that rarely occurred on the battlefield. The T-20 was nothing more than a converted Garand. The logistical crisis of the Second World War demanded a single, universal rifle. U.S. infantry relied on 3 incompatible types of ammunition. This fragmentation crippled the front line. A standard rifle squad was a technical mess. The M1 Garand, the Browning automatic rifle, and the M1919 machine gun all used .30-06 rounds, but they required different feeding systems. On-block clips, box magazines, and heavy metallic belts sat in the same supply trucks. Beside them, soldiers carried M1 and M2 carbines firing .30 carbine rounds. Tank crews and NCOs held Thompson or M3 grease gun submachine guns chambered in .45 ACP. 3 different calibers in one squad. This meant 3 parallel, independent supply chains to achieve a single combat objective. Imagine the chaos at the drop point. Supply officers sorted through a mountain of wooden crates. Bullets for the Garand would not fit the carbine. Magazines for the Thompson were useless for the BAR. One mistake in labeling meant a unit became combat ineffective in minutes. Logisticians faced a mathematical impossibility. Under intense fire, the transport of 3 distinct ammunition lines was unsustainable. Supply chains collapsed under their own weight. While American logists scrambled to unify full-sized rounds, engineers in Germany and the USSR had already proven the ballistic redundancy of such calibers. U.S. doctrine expected infantry to suppress targets at 1,000 meters. Real combat data from Europe showed a different reality. Most engagements happened within 300 meters. At that range, the .30-06 was overkill. The physics of the Great War no longer applied. High-power cartridges required heavy receivers and long bolts. A soldier carrying 80 rounds of 7.92 Mauser was already at his limit. The Germans identified the waste first. They took the standard casing and cut it down. The result was the 7.92 Kurz. Short, compact, efficient. The casing moved through the action faster. Recoil dropped. In 1944, the Sturmgewehr 44 entered the field. The high-pitched rattle of controlled automatic fire replaced the slow bolt cycle of the Kar 98K. It was the world's first true assault rifle. It arrived too late to save the Reich, but it provided a blueprint for the East. Soviet observers didn't miss the lesson. They abandoned the concept of the long-range bolt action for the masses. By 1947, they perfected the 7.62 by 39 mm round. It balanced weight, lethality, and controllability. Soviet engineers then integrated this 7.62 by 39 cartridge into a new weapon platform, the AK-47. While the American T-20 functioned, it remained a modified Garand. Engineers at the Frankfurt Arsenal ignored the emerging data on the AK-47. They focused on a different solution, the T-65 cartridge. This was a truncated .306, built on the shorter .300 Savage case. How to fit the energy of a .306 into a smaller shell? The answer was Olin ball powder. Technicians at the arsenal poured the dense, spherical grains into the brass. These tight granules provided the necessary burn density. In testing, the pressure gauges spiked. The shorter T-65 matched the full power of its larger predecessor. It was a chemical bypass of physical limitations. The newly formed NATO alliance demanded standardization. Tension with the Eastern Bloc made a common caliber a logistical necessity. Britain proposed the .200 British, a true intermediate round. It offered the same balance of control and lethality the Soviets had already mastered. The United States refused to compromise. American officials demanded full-power performance across the alliance. They applied heavy political pressure to the member states. Logic regarding recoil and automatic fire was discarded to maintain American supply chain dominance. The superior accuracy of the British .200 was sacrificed for ballistic excess. In 1954, the T-65 became the official 7.62 by 51 NATO standard. In 1957, the United States Ordnance Department staked the future of its infantry on a single technical promise: the reuse of old machinery. Expectation: a seamless transition using existing M1 Garand production lines. Reality: the 1930s tooling was obsolete. Every factory required entirely new assembly chains. Why did a system weighing 11 pounds defeat the Belgian FNFAL? The answer lay in a logistical lie. Engineers at Springfield Armory presented the T-44. It was a direct descendant of the M1 Garand. The operating system remained familiar: a gas-operated action, a rotating bolt. The rifle stripped away complexity. It had fewer parts than the FAL and weighed 1 pound less. It felt like the logical evolution of a legend. A technician slides a 20-round box magazine into the well. A sharp metallic click locks it home. The T-44 was ready. On paper, the specs were formidable. Weight: 9 pounds empty. Full load: nearly 11 pounds. Fire rate: 700 rounds per minute. Blueprints of the T-44 were overlaid onto 1930s Garand workstations. The geometry didn't match. Adapting precision tooling from the pre-war era for a select-fire weapon of the 1950s was an engineering impossibility. The cost savings were a bureaucratic myth. Despite the manufacturing friction, the decision was final. The Ordnance Department officially designated the T-44 as the M14 in 1957. The technical documentation approved in 1957 hit a wall of industrial reality. The Ordnance Department promised a seamless transition using existing M1 Garand tooling. They were wrong. By June 1960, the delivery count stood at fewer than 10,000 rifles. For a superpower, this was a statistical zero. Manufacturing lines designed for the 1930s could not adapt to the tolerances of the 1950s. The result was a logistical collapse. Production of the M14 proved slower than the manual assembly of prototypes during peacetime. Manufacturers struggled. They had to scrap the old jigs and build entirely new factories from the ground up. The promised savings vanished. The schedule disintegrated. It took until late 1961 for the first unit to receive their full crates. The soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division finally swapped their 8-round on-block clips for the 20-round detachable magazine. The tactile feedback was familiar. The operating system remained identical to the Garand. On the range, the accuracy was surgical. The Army officially handed the first full shipments to the 101st Airborne Division. But when the 101st Airborne began live fire drills, the physics of the weapon shattered the Army's one-rifle dream. A single shot was precise. A burst was chaos. The M14 was 44 inches of steel and wood, weighing over 10 pounds loaded. It was built for the parade ground, not the cramped interior of an armored personnel carrier. Can a soldier control 2,500 foot-pounds of muzzle energy in full auto? Field reports provided a definitive answer: no. Without a fixed mount, the energy was structural violence. The 7.62 NATO cartridge was too much for the platform. The barrel climbed instantly. On the third round, the sights pointed at the sky. Veterans called it an anti-aircraft gun because it refused to stay on target. The traditional wooden stock, a relic of the Garand era, lacked a pistol grip. It pushed the recoil vector above the shoulder, forcing the muzzle upward with every shot. There was no balance forward of the magazine. The Army attempted a mechanical fix with the M14A1. They added a pistol grip stock. They bolted on a folding vertical foregrip and a bipod. They installed a specialized muzzle brake. The weight surged to 14.5 pounds. Even at that mass, the physics remained broken. The barrel overheated after 2 magazines. The 20-round capacity made sustained suppressive fire impossible. It was a light machine gun that couldn't shoot, and a submachine gun that couldn't be aimed. The bureaucracy finally surrendered to the ballistics. They issued a simple order to the armories. Technical teams installed selector locks on the vast majority of the fleet. Commanders locked 90% of all M14 rifles to semi-automatic only. 1957. The same year the Pentagon adopted the M14, a parallel reality emerged. General Willard Wyman issued a request that defied a decade of Army ordnance dogma. He demanded a rifle weighing only 6 pounds when fully loaded. The caliber? A small .223 round. Ordnance had spent years rejecting the intermediate cartridge concept. They ignored the philosophy of the German St. G44 and the Soviet AK-47. Wyman did not. He wanted a weapon a soldier could actually control on full auto. He wanted a system light enough for a man to carry triple the ammunition. While engineers struggled to weigh down the M14 to 14.5 pounds, the alternative was already in motion. Eugene Stoner at Armalite took his AR-10 design, the rifle that had just lost to the M14, and scaled it down. He chambered the new platform for the .223 cartridge. The result arrived in 1958. It was a 6-pound frame of aluminum and plastic. It felt like a toy compared to the heavy steel and walnut of the current era. It was the AR-15. The platform existed. Testing was underway. The AR-15 began its life just as the M14 entered its first phase of production. While the Pentagon clung to heavy steel, Eugene Stoner's platform went to the range for a comparative trial. The results were a death sentence for the old guard. One soldier carried 220 rounds of 7.62 ammunition. Beside him, an AR-15 shooter carried 650 rounds. The weight was identical. The firepower was not. A 5-man squad with the new rifles matched the lethality of an 11-man M14 unit. How did the Army react to the fact that 43% of shooters ranked as expert with the AR-15, while only 22% reached that level with the M14? They ignored the data. To admit the AR-15 was superior meant admitting the M14 and the entire 7.62 NATO standard were systemic errors. The breakthrough came in 1962. 1,000 rifles arrived in South Vietnam for field testing. Soldiers fired 80,000 rounds through the humid brush. The sound of continuous fire filled the canopy. Not a single part snapped. Across 1,000 rifles, armorers replaced only 2 components. 1,300,000 rifles. The Pentagon produced over 1 million M14s before acknowledging the technical collapse of the program. It was the largest industrial admission of failure in American small arms history. On January 23, 1963, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara signed the order to halt all M14 production. 44 inches of steel and walnut against 5 meters of visibility. That was the mathematical reality of 1965. The Pentagon had spent a decade preparing for a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. They built a rifle for the Rhine and the Alps, long sight lines, engagements at 500 yards, open terrain. Then they sent it to the jungle. Why did the classic wooden stock become a critical technical defect? The answer lay in the cells of the American walnut. In the tropical humidity of Vietnam, the wood acted like a sponge. It absorbed moisture. It expanded. The soldier sits in the mud. He strips the weapon for a standard cleaning. He wipes the carbon from the bolt. Then he tries to reseat the barreled action into the wooden furniture. A dull crack echoes through the canopy. The wood has warped. The lugs no longer align with the swollen recesses of the stock. The rifle is now a collection of useless parts. It will not click back together until the timber dries out. In a firefight, that delay is fatal. The physical dimensions were equally punishing: 44 inches of length. This was the geometry of the 1940s. It was the silhouette of the M1 Garand, designed for trench warfare and open fields. In the triple canopy rainforest, those 44 inches became a hook. The barrel caught on every vine, the long stock tangled in the dense brush. Accuracy at 500 yards meant nothing when the enemy appeared at 6 feet. Then came the weight of the brass. A single 7.62 NATO round weighs 25 grams. Contrast that with the Soviet 7.62 by 39 at 17 grams, or the new 5.56 at just 12 grams. The logistics were brutal. A standard load was 200 rounds. For long-range patrols, that number climbed. The American infantryman was carrying twice the weight for the same volume of fire as his enemy. Fiberglass stocks were eventually commissioned to stop the warping, but the transition came too late. The soldier pushed against the receiver, trying to force the swollen wood to accept the steel. It wouldn't budge. The 44-inch rifle was a physical burden, but the weight of its ammunition was a logistical catastrophe. A standard combat load of 220 rounds of 7.62 NATO required 11 steel magazines. Total weight, 18 pounds. The math of the jungle was unforgiving. An M16 soldier carried the same 220 rounds for 8 pounds, half the weight. The Soviet AK-47 split the difference at 13 pounds for 210 rounds. If every soldier carried 22 pounds of brass and lead, the M16 user brought triple the firepower. This wasn't just about endurance, it was about the duration of the fight. On paper, all three platforms shared a cyclic rate of 700 rounds per minute. In reality, the M14 was uncontrollable. A 3-round burst turned the muzzle into an anti-aircraft gun, climbing toward the canopy. The M16 and AK-47 stayed on target. The Army recognized the failure of the full-auto concept for the infantry. Armorers began installing selector locks on the majority of rifles. This effectively converted the M14 into a semi-automatic weapon for the average soldier. Specialized units required a solution to bridge the gap between the standard rifleman and the sniper. To compensate for excessive dimensions and weight, the Navy SEALs requested a radical modification decades after the rifle's debut. This led to the creation of the Enhanced Battle Rifle, or EBR. How to integrate 1950s architecture into modern tactical realities? The answer lay in a complete structural overhaul. Engineers stripped the weapon to its core receiver. They replaced the traditional wood and steel with a chassis milled from aircraft-grade aluminum. A sharp metallic clack echoed every time the operator extended the new telescoping stock. The transformation was a study in contrasts. It remained 1950s mechanics, but now packaged in a high-tech aluminum shell. The standard 22-inch barrel disappeared. In its place, technicians installed an 18-inch chrome-lined barrel. This shortened the profile for helicopter deployments and tight urban corridors. Navy SEALs and Delta Force integrated the EBR into their specialized arsenals. The modular rail system allowed for night vision, lasers, and advanced optics. It was a temporary resurrection. Despite the modernization, the core remained an aging gas-operated system. Newer, purpose-built designs finally began to displace the hybrid. By 2018, the military withdrew the last combat versions from active service. While some units experimented with modular chassis, the Army pivoted to the weapon's core ballistic strength. They needed the 7.62mm rounds effective range. This decision birthed the XM21 system. Vietnam, 1969. The jungle was a sniper's graveyard. North Vietnamese sharpshooters inflicted heavy losses, and the U.S. Army lacked a dedicated long-range counter. They turned to the M14, not the mass-produced infantry version, but the national match grade. Technicians selected match-grade rifles with the tightest tolerances. They stripped the standard stocks. They hand-fitted specially selected walnut. Later, they swapped wood for fiberglass to resist tropical rot. The transformation was mechanical and precise. Did the optics match the rifle's potential? Only through constant adjustment. A technician mounted the Redfield adjustable ranging telescope. An operator peered through the glass. He dialed the range. Around the edges of the Redfield lens, the image distorted into a slight optical blur. He fired anyway. More than 1,300 XM-21 rifles entered service in Vietnam. The platform remained the Army's primary sniper tool for nearly 2 decades. It only stepped aside in 1988 when the bolt-action M24 arrived. But the M14 did not disappear. It waited. The mountains of Afghanistan reversed the Vietnam tactical map. The M4 carbine, firing 5.56mm rounds, lacked the reach for open terrain. Firefights broke out at 300 to 600 meters. This distance exactly matched the M14's original technical specifications for the European theater. The Army pulled thousands of rifles from retirement. This wasn't a standard issue, it was a scramble for range. They gave the rifles to the best shooters in each squad. Not snipers, not scouts. These men filled the vacuum between the rifleman and the specialist. The military officially codified the role of the designated marksman in the Standing Table of Organization. The Army officially replaced the M14 in 1967. This was the final sentence for a platform that lasted only 10 years as a standard-issue weapon. It remains one of the shortest service lives in American history. The transition was violent and controversial. What was the fundamental difference between the failures of the M16 and the defects of the M14? The answer lay in the chemistry of gunpowder versus the physics of steel. Early M16 rifles jammed because the Army changed the propellant against manufacturer specs. They issued no cleaning kits. Soldiers died with fouled chambers. But these were engineering errors. You could change the powder. You could issue a brush. By the time the M16A1 arrived, the platform functioned. The M14 was different. Its flaws were architectural. You could not fix its length in a jungle. You could not fix the weight of the 7.62mm NATO cartridge. The wooden stock warped in the humidity. The recoil made automatic fire physically uncontrollable. To fix the M14, you had to build a different rifle. Neither the superior penetration of the heavy round nor the temporary successes of sniper modifications could stop the shift. The 5.56mm era had arrived. The military moved the remaining inventory to Europe for a few more years of cold weather standby. Command stripped the M14 from the front lines. They stripped its tactical relevance. The rifle that was supposed to replace the Garand ended its journey as a parade piece. The Army transferred the remaining stocks to honor guards for ceremonial service.